So thank you for having me. I am going to give kind of a brief overview about human trafficking. I focus only on human trafficking in the United States. That doesn't mean that somebody who's being trafficked in Cambodia or somewhere else isn't equally as important. This is just what God has given me to focus on. And so I oversee, as they said, Central Oregonians Against Trafficking Humans, and that is the local work. We're part of the Oregon Human Trafficking Task Force. We have just formed a law enforcement task force as well, and there is a law enforcement only training coming up next Tuesday. So if you know anyone who is a sworn officer, then let me know and we'll make sure they get an invitation to the law enforcement only training. So I'm excited to be here. Why is there human trafficking? Why would somebody do such a horrific thing? And you've got the picture right there at the top. That is actually a picture off of a Facebook page of a victim. And you can see that's the money that she has collected. Every dime of it will go to her pimp or she will be severely punished. You can see that her dates brought her alcohol as well, and some weed, I think, is on the table also. So this is the reason for human trafficking always. And the victims, of course, are not getting any money. It goes directly to the trafficker. So we're going to talk about what happens here in Central Oregon briefly. I've been asked to tell a little bit about what I do for Super Bowl. And so I'm going to show you a news clip which kind of explains most of that. And how to identify human trafficking if you see it, because it is all around us. We just don't always see it. And I'm not saying that there's a trafficking victim under every rock, but believe me, we have plenty of victims right here in Central Oregon. And then how you can help. So now, do I tell somebody to go to the next slide? Or oh, look at that. All right. Okay, so here's a quick definition of human trafficking. Trafficking was not even a crime in the United States until the year 2000. Before that, we tried it under forced servitude, forced prostitution, those kinds of things. Now we have a law called the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, and here are a couple of quick images out of that law. Sex trafficking, it is a commercial sex act by force, fraud, or coercion, or any time a commercial sex act happens for somebody under 18 years of age. And there's no reason to show force, fraud, or coercion in that case. It is automatically a form of severe human trafficking. Labor trafficking, again, we've got that force, fraud, or coercion phrase. Recruit, harbor, transport, obtain, or employ a person for labor or services in involuntary servitude, peonage, debt, bondage, or slavery. So that is labor trafficking, and we have plenty of that here in Central Oregon as well. In fact, our first case that was ever brought to an actual law enforcement case was labor trafficking, a domestic person who had been trafficked with a family for 12 years back and forth from China to Sun River. And so it does happen here in a lot of different forms. The physical movement is not a requisite for trafficking. A person can be born, raised, and trafficked in the same home without ever having left. We like to say they move from vulnerability to extortion or exploitation. So that is a part of human trafficking. Okay. And the Trafficking Victim Protection Act protects both citizens and foreign nationals. And I will say, as a rule, and there are percentages on both sides of this, but as a rule, most labor trafficking victims are going to be foreign nationals. Most sex trafficking victims here in Central Oregon are going to be American-born citizens. In fact, I've never known of a trafficking victim here in Central Oregon that was not an American-born citizen. You see a little bit higher percentage in the big cities of foreign nationals, but for the most part, that's the kind of general way that it falls. Human trafficking is slavery. The difference between slavery in the 1850s and slavery today is, God forbid, but if I had a slave today, it would be equivalent to 1850 having a slave that cost about $40,000. So in today's money, a slave in 1850 would have cost about $40,000. Now for $40,000, I can buy a C-Class Mercedes. If I buy a C-Class Mercedes, I am going to keep it clean, I am going to change the oil, I'm going to take good care of it. That cost me $40,000. But what if that Mercedes only cost me $100? What am I going to do? And so that is the problem with slavery today. I had an ex-pimp that I was talking to one time, and I said, I was kind of talking about this whole concept, and he interrupted me, and I said, a slave today cost, and he said, nothing. And so that was what it had cost him for the literally hundreds of slaves that he had trafficked over the years. Next slide, please. People are trafficked. These are just some of the things that people are trafficked for, and we have seen the majority of these in Central Oregon. Prostitution, exotic dancing, and we like to call that forced prostitution, agricultural work, landscape work, domestic work and child care, factory work. We haven't found any factories here. Magazine sales, personal sexual exploitation, begging and street peddling, restaurant work, and we all know about the typhoon that was taken out of here, and that was indeed, there were trafficking situations going on there at the typhoon. Construction work, carnival work, hotel housekeeping, criminal activities, and day labor. Those are just any place where money can be exchanged and they have an opportunity to traffic. That'll be it. Locally, the majority of cases we see are sex trafficking, and then the next ones would be domestic servitude, like our first victim was here in Central Oregon, and then labor trafficking of probably migrants, people that are in restaurants. So there have been investigations for things like that here in Central Oregon as well. Portland, that got cut off, but Portland has the largest legitimate sex work per capita in the United States. And so what does that mean? Legitimate sex work means that something that you can get a business license with. So I can get a business license to run a strip club, massage parlor, a lingerie shop. All of those things are legitimate sex work. Portland has more of those businesses per capita than any other place in the United States. So we know what happens in Portland also happens here in Central Oregon. Why the Super Bowl? So that is something I've been doing for the last 5 years. I go about 2 weeks ahead of time. I work with the state's attorney general and the law enforcement and local nonprofits, and so I kind of help coordinate the efforts between all of those, and we work to try to find especially domestic minor victims of sex trafficking that are brought to Super Bowl to be sold for sex in the pre-Super Bowl activities. And so we show up 2 weeks ahead of time, finish the coordination. I've already been to Phoenix once. That'll be our next Super Bowl. Been to Phoenix once. I'm heading there again in a couple weeks. And so we work to coordinate. There's a lot of coordination and work that goes in ahead of time for these. So, and the reason is because it's the big dance. It's the big game. Anytime you have a major influx of tourists that have cash, it's a party atmosphere, and if it's particularly a male-oriented audience, which sports tend to be more male oriented than female, then you have demand for sex trafficking, and that equals money, and that's the bottom line. So we're going to play a clip. Yeah, that picture that you briefly saw was the picture of two of these girls that will be on the clip. That's all right. You can go ahead and play it. And
we're about to show you why you might walk right by without noticing. Fox Files investigator Chris Hayes traveled to New Orleans with a team of volunteers looking to rescue sex slaves.
Regular citizens travel to the Super Bowl each year to investigate the dark side of sports tourism. They are finding young girls, some who were reported missing. They go to the Super Bowl because that's where men are buying little kids.
that's Bourbon Street in
It's like a perfect
New Orleans.
You have all of these different elements come together that's just going to drive the demand.
Brad Dennis is the search director.
And that was our command center there.
He came to New Orleans to rescue girls.
2,200 children are reported missing every day in the United States. That's an awful lot of kids out there on the streets for predators to take advantage of.
He and Nita Bells are key members of a large group of volunteers and coalition members. Split up into about a dozen teams. They hit neighborhood by neighborhood in New Orleans.
Past Charter Street coming this way.
To the other side of the bay, Gulfport, Biloxi, they're feeding intelligence to joint task forces in both states.
They're all three in that block?
Biloxi Police Sergeant Alden Helmut is one of the point men.
When we're able to have citizens step up to be our eyes and ears, it provides us a great deal more resources.
While tourists may believe a stripper's smile is a sign she's choosing the lifestyle, the trained advocates and police investigators...
See the bruises on the back of her legs?
That our appearance is selling a product, so that the person realizes for them to be sold, they have to be attractive to the public.
Okay, watch real carefully what he does here.
She obviously, from her response, knew she had no
It's all right.
recourse.
The group narrowed in on this corner as a potential hotspot for
Can
sex
we back up
trafficking,
and
which
show
really
them what
surprised us
happened to
because
that girl?
We're surrounded by lots of people.
I want to
and lots
show
of-
you carefully what happened to this girl. I heard her scream. The pimp
Selling
came out of the
product.
strip club, grabbed her flesh right here and just twisted. And I heard her scream. What we didn't know, we had hidden cameras, and what we didn't know until we watched the footage was that he was walking out with a fistful of money. So he was there collecting money from his victims. Okay.
The person realizes for them to be sold, they have to be attractive to the public.
Then we witnessed it. A stripper who seemed content. Then a man grabbed her waist hard. You can hear her squeal. The man walked away with a wad of cash in hand.
That is a way of maintaining control, and although she objected to it, she obviously, from her response, knew she had no recourse.
The group narrowed in on this corner as a potential hotspot for sex trafficking, which really surprised us because we're surrounded by lots of people and lots of police officers. Potential signs included hurried girls struggling to make eye contact. Then we found these two. One of them looked like a baby.
Her face was young, her body was young, her mannerisms were young. She was running around like a little girl would run around with her girlfriend, and, you know, taking those little, you know how a child will walk and then they get in a hurry and they just run those steps, and she was doing that.
We watched her talk to two men in this bar. The men watched the girl while working their phones. Then the young girl walked out alone, eventually into a car with Texas plates. A man on a phone followed at a distance and got into the same car. The advocate snapped photos, took down a plate number, and sent it back to command headquarters. These volunteers gather intel, but stay out of the way, partly to protect the victims.
They're being watched. And I don't look like somebody that's going to bring her pimp money. And so I would be a distraction and I could get her in trouble or maybe even killed.
On the same side street, we found a mysterious door watched by this camera. On the door, step-by-step directions like face the camera, pull door handle, and do not allow anyone to walk in behind you. we soon saw two men exit that door to disappear into the neighboring liquor store. Numbers are still coming in, but this operation has rescued at least 15 girls, one who was reported as missing. Nita Bells first began working the streets after researching her book, In Our Backyard, which we found to be the case here in St. Louis when investigating pimps luring high schoolers right here. Learn more about what you can do. Bell's book and our previous investigations.
All right, so that's in the nutshell what we do at Super Bowl when we're out on the streets. We obviously don't have that kind of places where sex is sold here in Central Oregon. It happens online, and so that's the other thing we do is online surveillance, and we have active online surveillance going on here in Central Oregon now. So, and that's, picture is of the two gals that were walking along the street. And the only reason I put it up, you can't see their faces, it's just too far off. But the young gal was probably about 13, and I can't tell you how many times I've seen that clip, and every time I see it, my gut hurts. Because when you saw her walking across that street, she was walking into a car that was parked right around the corner, and her pimp was right behind her. So it really does happen, and it happens here. It's just not that blatant. So we'll go on. Who do sex traffickers target? Kids with needs. Anybody know any kids that don't have needs or aren't a little bit insecure? Or how about anybody here from a functional home? You know, runaways. I ran away. Many people have. Sexually active. If they have been sexually abused as a child, that increases their chances of being trafficked. They literally will target anyone. They'll target somebody from a normal home. My first chapter in my book is about a young girl from Portland, Oregon, who came from a Christian home, parents' marriage intact. She was a straight A student, and she was lured by what we call a bottom. And so within a pimp's hierarchy, a pimp may have 3 or 4 victims, and within that hierarchy, they're all striving to be his favorite. And his favorite gets a title, and that title is bottom bitch. And so if you saw the clip there, that was a good illustration. The older gal was the bottom, and the younger gal was being instructed with her, by her. So a bottom has the power given to her from the trafficker to recruit dates, to recruit new victims, to punish victims, to collect the money, and she also has to do the dates. So that is just part of the hierarchy that happens there. And also, I never want to forget that we've got vulnerable adults. An adult who is in her 20s or however age is just as much of a victim as somebody who's being trafficked younger. It breaks our heart more, and I always want to get the kids out because I think, oh, if I could just get them out, then, you know, maybe they've got a chance at a normal life. But adults are also recruited from bars, strip clubs, casinos, bus stations, parties, online, anywhere that a person can find a vulnerable adult. And the trafficker doesn't come to them and say, you know, hey, how about you sell yourself 15 times a night for sex? The trafficker comes with a line like, oh my gosh, you're so beautiful. And I had an ex-pimp tell me one time, pimps are good listeners. And so they listen, and they listen, and they listen. So they know what is needed, and then that is what they are going to provide. If a person wants love, that's what they'll provide. If they want money, if they want shelter, if they want travel, whatever it is that they want, that's what the trafficker says, I will provide. Okay, so this is where most sex is sold here in Central Oregon. It's a website called Backpage, and then there are other websites that bounce off of that. So we call it drilling as we go deeper than Backpage. This is a particular Backpage ad from Dallas, Texas. The girl in the top has bruises all along here like this. So what does it take to make a bruise that large on somebody's torso? So that is a red flag. Her face is blurred out, which indicates that she may be a minor. It's, then you have another girl who is obviously a different victim on the same ad. So that is another red flag that this could be a trafficker and not people that are actually selling themselves. Next slide. Somebody tell me what this is, that picture. Costco, yes. So our victim that was our first victim here, we used to take her out, I'd take her on errands with me to try to help her normalize being in public again. And that's one of the places I would take her, and she would freak out when she got there because that's where her traffickers used to, one of the places they used to take her, until she went for about 6 months, and then I'd have to chase her. No, you cannot get churros. She loved churros. You can't do it right now. I'm over here. I can't leave my cart. And your trafficker's in town, because the FBI would let us know when trafficker was in town. So they are hidden in plain sight. They're here. We just don't see them. Identifying, that's a picture from Miami Super Bowl. There are two girls there. The one on the left was the bottom. The one on the right had a skirt, a jean skirt that was loose. She had a tattoo all the way across. Victims are branded with tattoos just like we brand cattle. Go ahead and go to the next. I want to warn you that communicating with victims can be dangerous, not just to you, but to them. Saying the right thing or even the wrong thing, right thing even at the wrong time, could cost that victim or you or both your lives. I want to mention porn because it is an integral part of sex trafficking, and it is inextricably intertwined. I'm just trying to push through to the end there. 1 in 3 of all victims that are recovered from human trafficking here in the United States, and you notice I use the word recovered rather than rescued, because rescued indicates that they're just waiting for somebody to come and scoop them up, and they're not. They're traumatically bonded with their captor, which is a whole different training. But speak up. The idea is to speak up because you could be a part of somebody's freedom. This is from this year's Super Bowl in New Jersey, and you see the found on the faces. So a lot of people were recovered this year from Super Bowl. 16 people between the ages 13 and 17. 70 people were given services and 45 pimps arrested. This is a number, if you don't have it in your cell phone already, I'm going to encourage you to put that in your cell phone, and it'll be on the next slide as well. It is a number that is answered 24/7. If you need to get a hold of me in Central Oregon, you can even call that number because they know how to get a hold of me as well. And what can you do? Tell at least 3 people what you've heard today. Learn more. Connect with Oath. Advocate for better laws. That's another thing I didn't talk about. We've been working with the Oregon legislature and some local senators. We're going to come with another law, hopefully, in next legislative session, next January. Schedule a presentation, and there's that hotline number again. If you're on Facebook, I'm going to encourage you to like this page because I put human trafficking news on this page several times a day. I also put inspirational sayings because none of us wants a steady diet of human trafficking. I also screen everything that goes on the page. Anything that goes on that page I have read through. There's a lot of nebulous information going around. There are nebulous groups going around. And so anything that you get on that page, you know, I've looked it over and can put my stamp of truth on it. So, that it? Okay. We have about 1 minute for questions. I was hoping to leave more than that.
Nita, I have one.
Yeah.
So this last Super Bowl, I noticed, I don't know if it was the same for everybody, but in my Facebook feed, there were tons of articles coming out trying to negate what you just told us about the Super Bowl, that there's not
Right.
a lot of, that it's not as bad as people say. So where's that coming from, and what? Like,
That's a really good question. This is the first year that we've gotten pushback for what we did, what we've done for 5 years at Super Bowl, and I guess that's a good thing because the awareness has now increased. But where it was coming from were a couple of places. One, there's a strip club organization that has united, and they're saying they're coming against human trafficking, and I'll just leave it at that. And so that they were part of the source, and that was who some of the nonprofits were quoting. And there were some concerns that what we were doing at Super Bowl was taking revenue from what happens 365 days a year. And law enforcement, actually, every press release that law enforcement did, they came against that and really gave those nonprofits and the strip clubs not a basis to stand on. So absolutely, it is increased at Super Bowl. I'm not sure I believe it's the biggest human trafficking event. I can tell you it's a big human trafficking event. Yeah.
A lot of this deals with sex.
Uh-huh.
trafficking. But it seemed to me, I retired from law enforcement about 15 years ago.
I thought that.
It seemed like a lot of that was really visible in the drug world.
Mhm.
And they used the same last name you used for your gal, that they're trafficking meth and stuff. There's obviously, they weren't the ones who were getting rich. They were about to go lead the cars that could overtake it down the road.
Right.
Is that part of what you're working on? I mean, is that part of trafficking?
The drug and the trafficking intertwined.
Yeah, the girls that are being told they're gonna sell drugs and.
Right.
and they're basically the mule for,
Right.
it's like a pimp, it's just a person that's organized in the drug world. It's
Exactly.
being young girls like you're talking about and having to go out and sell this product. It's huge dollars.
Right. The way that it is absolutely intertwined, and from a law enforcement standpoint, you'll understand this. That's one of the ways, law enforcement has to have funding for whatever they do. And so they use their drug funding because it is so intertwined lots of times to work on stings. Yeah. Yeah. You probably need to give me the hook here. One more question. Yeah. Carrie.
Can you expand, I know all this, but can you expound a little bit on on how human trafficking is really integrated into the porn industry?
Oh, yes. Thank you.
A little. I know we don't have enough time to go into all of it.
Yeah. So pornography has gotten increasingly violent to satisfy the appetite of those who view porn. So people that view porn, the sensation, it's an addictive way of hitting us. And the good news is that there is help out. I see people released from that all the time. But that intertwined, there are people that are involved in porn and sex trafficking, and some porn is sex trafficking. And there are people killed, they're in debt bondage. It's horrifically intertwined. And there's a long story about that and a whole chapter about that in my book. So, yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for having me.